Some things in life are just better than others. For instance, the sound of this Audi RS3 will always be better than a 4-cylinder car. And that in a corner, a BMW will always be more fun than something with 4 rings on the front. Or will it? My name's Tom, and you're watching Paragon Cars. Let's go. Before we start, please like, subscribe and hit the bell if you'd like us to keep bringing you this content. Also, don't forget to follow our socials for updates on our stock. Links in the description below. Of course, as usual, we start with the engine. And what a glorious thing it is. 5 cylinders of rally-born rage, 400 horsepower, 480 Nm of torque, all-wheel drive, and a dual-clutch gearbox that goes through gears quicker than Zac Efron goes through plastic surgeries. Makes this thing a 0 to 60 monster. But what about the 30 to 70 sprint? Can it keep up with the big boys? Let's find out. Well now, we actually have a dilemma here. The RS3, the lesser car, matched the much more expensive Audi RS5's time at 3.5 seconds. In fact, the RS5 won't start pulling ahead until around 100 miles an hour, which makes this RS3, ironically, quite the bargain. The inside is probably my favourite generation of A3, high quality and technologically advanced, but you're not forced into using a touchscreen. The sport seats do look great, but they need to be a bit more supportive in the corners, as you do feel like you're flopping around a bit much. Moving to the rear, it's typical hatchback really, not super roomy, but there's just enough space to get comfy for short journeys. There isn't an armrest back here though, which does feel a little bit stingy considering this car was north of £50,000 when it was new. Moving further back to the boot, it's not only spacious but well laid out and just generally really high quality. Of course you can fold the seats down to create a flat load floor, and that combined with a square opening makes this pocket rocket a rather practical little thing indeed. But we're not here to talk about 12-volt sockets and boot space though, are we? So let's get on the road. Right then, driving the Audi RS3. First thing you notice, steering is lighter than an Audi S3 in comfort mode, which is pretty interesting. Suspension is definitely more purposeful, slightly stiffer, definitely feels like an RS car, not just an S car. And the main thing you notice is that lovely grumble from that 5-cylinder engine. The last time I heard this noise was in a Ford Focus RS, and I'm glad to have the noise back, as it is one of my favourites. We've got the DQ500 dual clutch gearbox in this, which is a slightly beefier version of the one in the sort of like, I think 2018 and onwards Audi S3. Both 7-speed, but this is just slightly stronger, and you don't really notice a difference in terms of smoothness or anything like that. I mean, they're both dual clutch boxes, so why would you? But the only thing you do notice is that the torque comes in slightly later in this Audi RS3, so it is revving to around 2,500 RPM around town. That's actually quite nice, because it means you get to hear that lovely grumble of that 5-cylinder engine. Of course, being an RS car, we've got a slightly wider track at the front, and we do actually have wider tyres as well. We got 2 5.5s on the front and 2 3.5s on the rear. Audi usually do a completely square setup, but because these are kind of known for understeering, this version of the RS3, they've gone for a wider track, wider tyres, and slightly stiffer suspension at the front to hopefully counteract some of that understeer. Now, I've never driven one of these before, and after driving an S3, my hopes aren't that high, because the weight balance is still way over the nose, so I'm guessing it's still going to understeer at some point. But it's not really about the chassis, is it, this car? It's more about the engine. I'm just hoping we can have a little bit of fun at least. In terms of parking, it's still an Audi A3 really. The only difference is you get a slightly faster steering rack, so you're just going from lock to lock a little bit quicker. But parking this thing is an absolute breeze in town. Still a small car at the end of the day, so getting into a space like this isn't hard whatsoever. You've got parking sensors all round that are nice and accurate. You can get a reverse camera, not that you'd need it. View out the back is pretty good, and view in the wing mirrors are pretty good as well. So if you want something fast for driving around town with, this is a great car. Suspension's sporty, but not too sporty. It's just letting you know that there's something going on under there. In terms of coming out of junctions, it's not going to turn the engine off, is it? No. Wait for this guy to go past. Give it half throttle. And the Quattro system, combined with 400 horsepower and 480 newton-meters of torque, means you can get up to the speed limit pretty much as fast as you'd ever need to. Also responds fairly well. The dual clutch box is a little bit laggy. It kind of revs and then slams into gear. So it kind of feels like kind of old-fashioned. You get this like fast gear change, snappy, hits you in the back, combined with an engine that loves to rev. As soon as you're above about 4,000 RPM, this car really comes alive. But below that, it still has just enough power to sort of be smooth and gentle. Right, let's reset our trip computer and see what MPG we can get on the motorway. Apparently these aren't actually too bad if you're driving fairly carefully. I'm hoping we can get maybe like 38 to 40 miles per gallon. That would be nice. Right then, on the motorway, what is this Audi RS3 like? Well, initial impressions are that it's actually fairly comfortable. The seats get just about low enough. You can adjust the pitch of the base. They're not overly bolstered. In fact, they could do with a bit more bolstering, I think. I feel like when I'm going to get to the corners, I'm going to be flopping around a little bit. But road noise and wind noise, yeah, I mean, it's like a normal Audi A3, which is very good. Audi make very quiet cars for the motorway. I mean, this is similar to something like a Mercedes C-Class or a BMW 3 Series. It really is that good. Then in terms of visibility, well, again, the same as an Audi A3. Very easy to see out of, car's not too big. You got, you know, wing mirrors to help you with your blind spot. You've got thin A pillars, thin B pillars that are nice and far back. So yeah, it's very easy to see out of. Then in terms of how it drives on the motorway, this is where it is different from an Audi S3 even. Steering is definitely more positive. It does want to find undulations in the road a little bit more. It wants to turn into a corner a lot more than the Audi S3 does, which is a good thing. You know, it's more like a BMW in that regard. It does mean though that you are kind of like fighting the steering wheel a little bit, but you know, it's still an Audi. It feels like you could go 180 miles an hour in this thing and it wouldn't even care. Then in terms of throttle response, when you're in 7th gear, you sit at about 2,000 RPM, you're sitting at 70 miles an hour, or just under that when you're sitting at 60. So you're right within that sort of meaty torque band, which is nice. So if I just tickle the throttle, it stays in 7th gear, but as you can see, it glides up to 70 fairly quickly actually. So for doing quick overtakes and stuff like that, it's a really good car. Also, the suspension really settles down on the motorway. You still feel that it's like a sporty car, but it's not overly sporty. It rounds off the smaller undulations well, and it goes over bigger bumps, just letting you know they're there without making it uncomfortable. This is just the passive damper setup, by the way. You can get mag ride, which is even better than this, but I think this passive system is pretty well judged so far. Then in terms of quality, this is where Audi is always good, but they've taken this RS3 to another level. Not only do you get soft touch materials pretty much everywhere in the cabin, you get the finest quality Nappa leather I think I've ever seen in a car. And this is the same leather that you get in stuff like Audi R8 and Lamborghinis, and it just feels so nice to the touch. It's so soft, so supple, and feels so expensive. Then you come to the rest of the interior, which is typical Audi, but Audi make everything so nice to use. You've got lovely clicky buttons that just never get old. You've got knurled switches everywhere. And everything just feels super high quality, which means there's no rattles or squeaks in the cabin. And when you're spending a lot of money, especially on a hatchback, it's kind of nice to have. Unfortunately, the new Audi A3 isn't quite as good in terms of quality. They've definitely stepped down in terms of putting things together properly, because I noticed there's some rattles in the newer car, and definitely a bit more plastic where there shouldn't be. For me, this is definitely the best generation A3, as you're not forced to use a touchscreen, but you've still got all the technology you want as well. Still got Apple CarPlay, still got the virtual cockpit that's got plenty of options with it, and still got physical climate controls. In terms of options, if I only had 3 choices, what would I pick? Well, the first thing is actually going to be the B&O sound system. This particular car doesn't have it, and whilst the standard system is okay in something like an A3, if you're getting an RS3, you've got a good soundtrack coming from the engine, so why not have one coming out of the speakers as well? And the B&O system in this particular car is insane. For some reason, this generation Audi A3 had a really good sound system if you got the B&O package, so definitely go for that if you can. The next thing is actually going to be a panoramic roof, because as I mentioned before, you've got a good sound system coming out the back, so why not enjoy it a little bit more by having a panoramic roof that you can tilt and slide back, so you just get a bit more exhaust noise. And then the last thing is just going to be the sports exhaust system. This particular car has it, and it is a huge upgrade from the standard exhaust system. We've had a couple of RS3s that have had the standard exhaust, and it doesn't do the engine justice. It really doesn't. And this car is all about the engine, so why would you restrict its lungs and not give it the sports exhaust system? Plus, being a 2017 car, it means you absolutely must get the sports exhaust system, because this is before these cars came out with all these silly filters that restricted the noise even more. So not only do you get a good noise as standard, you get a really good noise when you go for the sports exhaust system. Alright, there's a bit of traffic on the M25, so I'm coming off slightly early, but we've still managed 35 miles per gallon, which is really not that bad. You know, for a car with 400 horsepower, 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds, it's fairly impressive, really. Okay, use my favourites button, back into dynamic. We're going to go traction fully off now. Into manual. Let's give it some. Well, hey, look at that. That was a bit of oversteer. That's what I'm talking about. Now that is much better than the Audi S3. This car does have an adaptive quattro setup, so you can select between comfort and dynamic mode. So I'm guessing it's just sending a little bit more power to the rear via its Haldex system. And you definitely notice it. There was definitely some power sliding going on there. Brakes are nice and sharp. Don't kill the pigeon. For some reason it wanted to die there. And the good thing about this RS3 is it's so loud even with the windows up. Oh, that sounds good. And this engine really comes alive above 4,000 RPM. You're not hitting peak power until just below 6,000, and you're not hitting peak torque until just below 5,000. So this is an old school engine that loves to be revved. This really is rally car for the road, this thing. Whoever said these were understeering messes is talking absolute crap. Do you know what? I really wasn't expecting this car to handle this well. Usually Audis, no matter how hard you push them, do tend to understeer. So it's really nice to see that this thing doesn't. And boy oh boy, do you need those brakes. You might think, oh, if I map my S3, it's not far off an RS3. The way this thing pulls in gear is in a totally different league. This is more RS5 than S3. You know, you're above the speed limit very, very quickly. And the noise from this engine, oh, it never gets old. It really doesn't. Well, this car has surprised me, so I'm going to go around one more time, just for good measure, just to make sure I haven't missed anything. Look, Honda NSX. What? It oversteers! It oversteers! This is an Audi! Why is it oversteering? I'm lost for words. Every journalist just says this thing understeers into corners. You give it power, it oversteers. You come off the power, the chassis has a nice balance, it oversteers. It lift-off oversteers. What? And you know, I'm not having to push the car too hard to do that. I know we're on wet roads, but still. Like, front end holds. I can feel the rear going. What's happening right now? This isn't an Audi. Let's just make sure I'm not dreaming right now. Pinch myself. Yep, being pinched. Yes, the Audi RS3 will drift. If I stayed in it as well, this would do like a full all-wheel drift. Like, I'm coming off the throttle and it's still oversteering. What? I'm genuinely lost for words. I was not expecting this. This is so different to an Audi S3. This is, not only is it in a totally different league in terms of its engine, blah blah blah, the way this thing handles is in a totally different league. This is like Mark III Ford Focus RS kind of handling. Admittedly, suspension isn't quite as stiff. Steering is not quite as good, I'd say. It's very close. But for an Audi? What? Every single review of this car has been journalists just saying, oh yeah, it's a little bit better than the old one in terms of understeer, but it's still not fun. I'm sorry, but this is fun. This is definitely a fun car. Let's take it to a tighter B road and see what that's like. Right, down a tighter B road. Oh yes. This is what the RS3 was meant for. This is a serious bit of kit. I mean, this really is rally car for the road, guys. You are getting away from supercars down here. Mainly because the car is small, but it's so agile. What a weapon. I'm speechless. This is one of the most fun cars I've driven, and it's got 4 rings on the front. What? What? I suppose it's conclusion time then. After calming down for a bit, I've come to the realisation that I never thought was possible. This thing, this Audi, God, I can't believe I'm going to say this, really is one of the most fun cars I've ever driven. Let me put it in perspective though. This is very much out of the ordinary for this company. The RS3 is in a league of its own. It's not related to the S3, nor the Audi RS5. If someone told me this was a new manufacturer, co-owned by Ford and BMW, I'd believe them. Now I know when it comes to a track, the RS3 probably falls apart, but today, on these roads, it was a monster. An absolute monster. As always, I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, give it a like and why not subscribe. Because not only can you see more content like this, you can see everything we have for sale, which I'm very glad to say includes this very special car indeed. My name's Tom, and you've been watching Paragon Cars. I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.